Hey guys, welcome to another Was It Woke video. So today we're going to be covering Loki, the recent release of season 2. You know how this goes, so I'm just going to jump right into it. So without further ado, let's get started. The first criteria is racial diversity. So just like every Disney show pretty much these days, this is no exception to having a complete cast that's like completely diverse in every way possible, regardless of the scenario, regardless of the location, the time period, whatever it may be. Every scene is just a diverse cast. And, in isolation, I have no issue with that. But the problem is we know what the dogma is of Disney these days, their executives and all of that. They want forced diversity in basically all of their products, and Loki season 2 is no exception. But outside of this forced diversity, there was no real forced agenda in terms of promoting certain races as being superior or inferior to others. They were just kind of there just to represent this diverse cast that they want to present. And so for that, I have to give a 5 out of 10 for racial diversity. Number 2 is LGBTQ representation. So straight up, there was no representation to be found in this season. And not only that, but if you call back to the first season where there's a mention by Loki himself of him being essentially bisexual, there is no reference to that whatsoever in this season, not in his behavior or through his words or anything like that. So there's just no representation of that whatsoever. And so I'm just going to give a 0 out of 10 for LGBTQ representation. Number 3 is toxic masculinity / feminist messaging. So this is a big one because starting off with the men are often in this show portrayed as either weak, incompetent, or evil. This is a very common thing that you find in most products these days, particularly with Disney, is that they want to portray them as one of those three things. Anything to avoid portraying them as the main competent hero. They will always go down one of those other paths to subvert the audience, essentially. But then moving on to the female side of things, there is definitely strong feminist messaging in the sense that countering all the incompetence of the male characters, the women characters, the females, are very competent. They're in control. They're stoic. They take things very seriously. They're capable. They're never one-upped by the male characters. There's a particular scene in the final episode where Loki has the opportunity to go back and back and back to the past to take on Sylvie, and in no sort of scenario is he able to defeat her. So that's just complete and blatant, using that feminist messaging to always show the women coming out on top regardless. They do not want to see them ever defeated by a man. And so it's completely prevalent here with this criteria. And so for the heavy use of toxic masculinity and feminist messaging, I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10 for toxic masculinity and feminist messaging. Number 4 is traditions bad, progressivism good. So there's nothing really to delve into on this criteria, but there is one particular area. So there is a conversation about midway through the season between Loki and Sylvie. That's basically this debate between the idea of tearing the TVA down versus turning it into something better. And so you got Sylvie, who's kind of this more progressive angle of we should just burn it all to the ground, whereas Loki has the more kind of hopeful perspective, is that what if we improve it and make it better and make it work the way it's meant to work. And so if Loki kind of represents the tradition, I guess, in that aspect, and to the show's credit, they actually do kind of present Loki's position as being the more virtuous one, and they show Sylvie's one as being the more brash, sort of immature solution. So credit where it's due. So I'm only going to give a 1 out of 10 for traditions bad, progressivism good. The 5th and final criteria is anti-capitalism / pro-socialism. This is a nice and easy one. There's no reference to either in this show. It doesn't really play into the story of the show whatsoever. So that's just going to be a 0 out of 10 for anti-capitalism / pro-socialism. And so as per the usual process, we take the total of these 5 criteria, which equals 14 in this instance. We divide that 14 by the 5 criteria, and that equals 2.8. So according to my criteria, 2.8 falls just within the a little woke category. I'm actually kind of surprised by this because most Disney products these days are usually teetering on that pretty woke mark to above, just by the way that they make their products these days, their shows, their movies and whatnot. But I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that they kind of pull back in certain areas. There's definitely the toxic masculinity and feminist side of things, which were definitely prominent in the show and still have been since season 1. But it was nice to see they kind of pulled back on some of the things that were kind of controversial and kind of unnecessary from the previous season, like Loki's bisexuality and all that kind of stuff, things we didn't need to know or didn't really care about. But yeah, so they did pull back in some regards, and tried to give a bit of leeway here and there, but yeah, still some of it prominent, which gives it, which pushes it, I guess, into that a little woke category. So yeah, outside of toxic masculinity and feminist messaging, this show is actually pretty safe for consumption for all people, I would say. If that particular category is an issue for you, then by all means steer clear. But otherwise, I don't find many other issues with the show from a wokeness perspective. So yeah, that's my overall thoughts, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Bye.